In this video today, I'm going to be sharing with you how to start a podcast successfully in 2023. So, I launched my podcast last year, Invest Like a Girl. If you haven't checked it out, go do it. It's all around helping women reach financial freedom. This is something that I was so passionate about. At the start, it was very much heavily around investing. As I grew into my podcast, I realized that I was shutting myself off from my full potential of my audience because I wasn't actually doing what I wanted to do. I put myself in a box and said, that is the only content that I can share because that's the way I started it. And I just believe as you actually go through the journey of building out your podcast, you're going to try and say, this is my target audience. But it's okay if that ebbs and flows, and the strategy that you're going to create from the start isn't always going to align when you're doing the thing. So, I want to be brutally honest with you. The reason why I started a podcast is because I wanted to get better at speaking, and I wanted to have continuous amount of content, and I wanted to give value to my audience. Now, in order to do those, you have to be consistent. So if you're a person that struggles to show up, this is going to be hard for you. But it's also going to be really rewarding and a great challenge. So I recommend jotting down your target audience, why you're doing this podcast, like what is the purpose? What are you so easily and gratefully able to speak about? You're never going to run out of content ideas. Write those things down, start brainstorming. Do you want it to be your personal name? Are you going to use a business? What resonates with your audience? Ask your friends, ask your peers if they are in your target audience. Now, the next part of this is really understanding what type of podcast you want to have. So at the start, I wasn't confident speaking. So I felt really comfortable having guests on and having my questions already written out and having a schedule. That felt good for me at the start. Now, at the place that I'm in now, I can pretty much jump in with my microphone and just start speaking my mind because I want that close proximity and that community feel like they know who I am as a person. So it's really about like, do you want solo episodes? Do you want maybe a co-host? Do you want to just have guests on? And that's going to ebb and flow. But remember, it's also a lot more work when you have guests on because then you have to have, like I had a podcast manager because I was traveling and I could afford it and I wanted to enjoy podcasting. So now at my agency, I actually offer this as a service. Feel free to DM me on Instagram if you want support with your podcast. Now, the next thing that I would really think about is what type of podcast, like what is your industry? Because when you set it up through Apple, Spotify, Google, they're going to be asking you what is your industry as a whole. So maybe it's business, maybe it's entrepreneurship, maybe it's self-development, maybe it's health. Figuring so you can have one main and one subcategory. This is important because you want to do some research and see what your competitors are doing and look at your point of difference as a podcast. There is so many ways to monetize your podcast when you get to that. And I'm going to do a completely different video on monetization and how that works in podcasting. Now, we've mapped out our podcast as a whole. Now it's start to really nut out episodes. So I think at the start, it's just good to word dump, like whatever comes to mind. And then from there, you can kind of be like, well, we want to go in a chronological order. So say at the start of my podcast, if you go back to my first, it says, what is cryptocurrency and what is Bitcoin? That felt good for me and my listeners to take them on a journey from the start and keep on going. Now it's obviously it's evolved. Like I talk about sex, I talk about tantra, I talk about business and entrepreneurship. There's so many things. I'm a multifaceted human. So now I just speak about whatever I really want to. But at the start, I wanted to have that structure because that felt good for me. When purchasing a microphone, there is so many out there. I'm going to give you two that are very affordable. One is Rode USB mini mic. It's $119. Pick it up on Amazon. And then there's also the Yeti mic. The difference between these two is one's a lot heavier than the other. So I originally went with the Rode to start off with because I was traveling. I then also bought my best friend Yeti because I thought she was going to be in one spot, and it's just like a little bit heavier. They're both great. They're great beginners mics, and they're just around that $100 mark. This is what I think is important, is not to get caught up with all the gadgets and like stuff at the start. You just need a USB mic. It's so easy, and you can record that on GarageBand, on Zoom, or there's also another thing called Riverside. So if you're dealing with guests a lot, I preferred the cut out. So I'll put a little photo of what that looks like over the Zoom. This is personal preference. Does it matter? No. At the start, it might be just easier for you to do Zoom, and that's so fine. I do know that Riverside, you do get a certain amount of hours recording before you have to pay for it. And hack, I sometimes just like sign up for another account using another email. Shh, don't tell anyone. The next part you need to think about is your intro. So I had an intro at the start, and now I just don't. I just have music that kind of like cues it in, because I said to my editor, I was like, it doesn't align with me, my intro anymore, and I didn't want to re-record one. I do think it's important. Now what I'm going to be implementing is small call to actions to subscribe, leave a review, and share this on their Instagram. That just feels good to me. I'm not adding any ads into my podcast, but I am making sure that if they are liking the content, we are giving them a call to action to implement. I do think that that's important, because the algorithm of podcasting comes from your ratings, your listen time, and your reviews. So the more ears that you can get on the podcast is important. So you want to make sure that you are encouraging people to listen and to share the word about your podcast. Plus, I also do find, this is like another little hack that I'm implementing this year, is if you say, hey, if you leave a review, leave your Instagram and I'll give you a shout out on Instagram. That's a fun way, because they're actually taking time to write a review, which is like, it's a little bit of effort. So you want to give them a reward. Or another fun way is like, do a giveaway. We're getting ahead of me now because I just love to strategize. And podcast does come from strategy. Like if you do want to monetize your pod, there is a lot of work at the beginning of like really thinking ahead of being like, okay, I want to sell this program. What content do I need to start educating my clients about to be able to sell this program? So it's a kind of like reverse engineering process, which if you are interested in, I do have below my link to Pod Squad, which is a mini mastermind, and it is a 7-week journey for anyone who is wanting to get on the charts on their podcast. So we go through the how-tos at the start, but then we also strategize as a community. So this is for females only. So look below in the link to check out more information on that. The next part. So if you are just wanting to do this for free and you're wanting to try it out, I still use this program now. And this is where I host my podcast on. So what that means is it then distributes to Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts. So it's pretty much just like a platform where I upload, write my show notes, and then schedule it to then distribute to all of the platforms that I want to be hosted on. So I use Anchor. It's completely free. It's just anchor.fm. I will show you what my Invest Like a Girl one looks like here. It's just easy. It's also owned by Spotify, and you get a nice little pretty link. Maybe you just want to upload to one platform. The problem with that is I even once sent my podcast episode to a girlfriend through Spotify, and she goes, oh, I don't have Spotify. And I was like, who doesn't have Spotify? Weird. But let me give you the stats where my listeners listen on. 57% is Spotify, 38% is Apple Podcasts, and 6% is other. So that gives a really good indication that if I was only on Spotify, I'm missing out on 30% of my community that listen on Apple. That's huge. So I guess the other thing you're probably thinking about is editing. I've got to edit this episode. It's going to be hard. It's going to be tedious. If you have an Apple computer, you can do it in GarageBand. That's where I would suggest. I don't have any other suggestions on that because I personally don't edit my episodes. If you are to join the Pod Squad, I will be happy to give you my editor. And this is huge for me because a lot of entrepreneurs aren't happy to do that, but I feel like I want to give you value in my program, and I'm literally going to be hosting a live call with my podcast manager and also my editor, so you can ask them directly the questions that you want to know. This is huge. But if you don't join the Pod Squad, totally fine. You're missing out, girl. Let me tell you, go onto Fiverr or Upwork. There's millions on there. It's just you have to take the time to sift through and jump on a call with them and make sure that they actually know what they're doing. What else? Let me think. The other thing, thumbnail. In your thumbnail, you have certain requirements you need to follow to make sure that it fits the podcasting style, and also each platform has do's and don'ts. So make sure that you research that, and I would suggest having your face in it if you're wanting to build a personal brand, because I don't know, I think that there's so many podcasts out there now that if you can put a face to a brand because you're not seeing it visually, I think it's really important. You also want to do something that stands out, especially if your competitors are all doing black and white and red. Do black and white and orange. You know what I mean? Do something that is going to draw your ideal client in. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. If you can press subscribe and the like button below, it's much appreciated. Anything else, head to my Instagram and I'm happy to answer any more questions.